I will record. And good morning, ladies and gentlemen, and dear audience. On behalf of Conflict and Resilience Research Institute Canada, I welcome all of you to today's webinar. This webinar is particularly important because of its theme. Our today's theme is Rebuilding Anti-Nuclear Weapon Movement, Windows of Opportunity. Today we are honored to have distinguished panelists in North America, those who have spent years of their expertise, research, and insights they are going to share with us this afternoon. As a tradition, before we move on to the event, we do treaty acknowledgement. The Conflict and Resilience Research Institute Canada is located on original lands of Anishinaabe, Cree, Oji-Cree, Dakota, and Dene peoples, and the homeland of Métis Nation. We respect the treaties that were made on these territories. We acknowledge the harms and mistakes of the past, and we dedicate ourselves to move forward in partnership with Indigenous communities in a spirit of reconciliation and collaboration. Ladies and gentlemen, today, Mr. David G. Newman, a Rotarian and co-founder of Rotary Club of Winnipeg Peacebuilder Committee, is going to moderate this session. And we are very delighted to have him with us. So without further ado, let me hand over the floor to Mr. David G. Newman. Sir, floor is yours.
Thank you. Welcome, everybody who has taken this Saturday part of the afternoon to engage with us in an important conversation, a conversation we would all probably agree is of existential importance. And the voices of individual human beings are so important in bringing about the change in consciousness, the change in understanding, the motivation of civil society to influence and have the confidence that they can effectively influence the decision makers at high levels, whose job responsibilities, whose mandates really oblige them in the public interest to address these issues that threaten us and put us at risk as individual human beings. And when I talk about us, it's not we folks on this call. It is everybody. It is children. It is women. It is the oppressed and vulnerable peoples of the world. It's the indigenous peoples of the world who have been left out of decision making. And above all else, it is future generations, because they are threatened. The yet unborn are threatened. And the risks are far too great for us to continue. So that's why we're together, and that's why we would probably agree that the most immediate threat to that existence and the health of humanity and future generations is nuclear weapons. So having said that, I just wanted to indicate the quality of the wisdom and life experience that is here. Senator Douglas Roche has a record in Canada of being not just originally a pioneer at an international level to advocate for nuclear abolition, but he has stayed the course and lit a flame of hope in a book called Recovery, which everyone should read. Everyone should read. It is Peace Prospects in the Biden Era. And he's written this in a very readable form. And he's given hope, a verbalization. It is an action. And you read the book and he'll be able to talk about the vision and the call to action that are expressed by him so eloquently and with such simplicity, the genius of simplicity, that it reaches not just your mind, but it truly reaches your heart and spirit. So Douglas, we're so grateful to have you here, and I'm going to have you kick this off with the inspiration. But I just briefly will also comment on Anne Frisch, Dr. Anne Frisch. We have Anne, who has been a light for a mainstream organization made up of business and professional people and others from around the world as an educator on this whole concept of the threats and risks of nuclear weapons. She has taken that leadership, and I must say, with a lot of resistance from people that don't want to rock the boat. They say this is political and we should stay out of this and so forth. But Anne has persevered, and she's building awareness on an international level, right from the state of Minnesota and her Rotary Club there, which is about to transition as she leaves that club and creates a very specific Rotary Club dedicated to the abolition of nuclear weapons. So Dr. Anne Frisch, welcome, Professor Emeritus, and I think she's become more active than ever before at this stage in her life. Dr. Richard Denton is a retired physician, but my goodness, this district governor in the making of Rotary International. He becomes a district governor-elect, I guess, on July 1st from Sudbury, Canada. And Richard Denton is an amazingly committed physician who's part of an organization of physicians that received the Nobel Peace Prize some years ago. And it's not surprising that several Rotarians who are physicians or were physicians were very active in that achievement. And more notably and remarkably, their passion has only increased as the threat gets greater, and they mature and share and motivate us. So Richard, thanks for being here. And Halal, you're probably here from Bangladesh. Halal is another PhD and a wonderful individual who is part of the CRRIC Academy that Kauser and Halal were instrumental in creating. And that's, of course, who is hosting this event today. And Dr. Kauser Ahmed is an amazing Bangladesh retired lieutenant colonel who came to Winnipeg after serving as a blue helmet for the Bangladesh Army in places like the Western Sahara. And he put aside his guns and decided he wanted to become a peacemaker, peace builder. So he registered in the PhD program in Winnipeg, Canada, achieved that, has written a book about grassroots peace building, which is really based on research done in our city. Amazing contribution. And then he's written several other publications on being a UN Blue Helmet chapter of book, but also about the Rohingya peoples, the stateless peoples, and continues to pursue that and many other causes and challenges, humanitarian in nature, that, of course, are challenges which are even less priority in terms of existential nature, but certainly are evidence of why we have to act and why we have to act now, and the suffering that's being caused by the world that has been created by a lot of arrogance, ignorance, and greed that needs to be now readdressed. So why is the topic today? It's about rebuilding. And that's what Douglas Roche speaks to in his book. It's what Richard will speak to in his presentation. And I look forward to Anne's first. But I will start off with Douglas Roche and then Richard, who has a bit of a slide presentation to accentuate, enhance his presentation, and Dr. Anne Frisch next, and then we'll move into Q&A. So Douglas Roche, honored.
Thank you very much indeed, and congratulations to the sponsors of this important discussion that we're going to have. I begin by noting that the polling organization NANOS recently surveyed Canadians on their views on nuclear weapons, and the survey found that 80% of Canadians want the world to work to eliminate nuclear weapons, and 74% agreed that Canada should join the new treaty on the prohibition of nuclear weapons, which came into existence in 2017. And this poll indicates, it shouldn't be a surprise to any of us, because we've known that Canadians through the decades, the 7 decades of the existence of nuclear weapons, have been fundamentally opposed to them, recognizing that they are a fundamental evil, and that it is a very sad comment on the human situation that we, the governments of the world and peoples of the world, have not been able to eliminate this what the International Court of Justice called the ultimate evil. I mean, we would have to spend all our time on this broadcast to go through how bad this level of destruction is, where there would be no, from a catastrophe, a nuclear catastrophe, there would be no humanitarian ability to cope with it. And so we begin by noting that Canadians recognize this and they'd like something done about it. So, but why are nuclear weapons prevailing today? Why are there still 13,000 nuclear weapons? 90% of them are possessed by the United States and Russia, and Britain, France, and China have smaller numbers. And then India and Pakistan have joined the nuclear club. Israel has nuclear weapons, and North Korea certainly has at least one, if not more, nuclear weapons, and Iran has been trying to develop the technological capacity. So this nuclear club, while it is still small in terms of the 193 states of the United Nations, is very powerful. And when we consider that the 5 permanent members of the Security Council, the United States, Russia, Britain, France, and China, are the very states that are charged with maintaining peace and security in the world, and these are the states that are holding nuclear weapons in great numbers. And the danger of this situation continues as at least 2,500 nuclear weapons possessed by the United States and Russia are held on constant alert status, meaning they can be fired on 15 minutes notice. And a computer malfunction, any kind of an accident, can set off a calamity in the world. It's really insane that we in the world who have developed such technological capacity and science and for the betterment of humanity are allowing this to go on. And it's not only just going on, but it's getting worse, because the main states are modernizing their nuclear weapons. The United States alone has a $1.3 trillion program to modernize its nuclear weapons over the next 20 years. And so in their submarines, and they're launching in Earth, and airplanes, it's the triad, they call it, is being strengthened. This is in direct contravention to the Non-Proliferation Treaty. The Non-Proliferation Treaty came into existence in 1970, and under Article 6 of the Non-Proliferation Treaty, all states undertook in good faith to negotiate comprehensively the elimination of nuclear weapons. This has been reinforced by the International Court of Justice that said this is a valid and a proper goal, and that states that engage in nuclear warfare would be committing a criminal act. So the Non-Proliferation Treaty is reviewed every 5 years, and the review was to have been the latest review was to have been held in the year 2020, that is to say last year, and it was postponed because of the COVID, and is now to be held in August, although very few people think that the conditions will allow an in-person meeting and by August, so it's probably going to be in January of next year. So the treaty is very important in stopping proliferation because it commits states to not proliferate nuclear weapons. So it has been successful to the extent that we don't have 25 or 50 states. I mean, any state that has a nuclear reactor has the capacity to build nuclear weapons. So at least we have not got into such numbers of states, but the 9 that are holding them, and particularly the United States and Russia, with their very unstable relationship now, and not to mention the antipathy between India and Pakistan, all of this sets up the world for a waiting calamity. And so in my book, I describe, the triple emergency that the world is passing through now. We hear a lot about and participate a lot in climate change and global warming issues, and that is certainly an immense problem that the world is facing. Now, of course, we've been joined by the COVID as a leveler of all of humanity, irrespective of race, color, religion, borders, or anything. The COVID just sweeps through the world and exposes our vulnerability. And we should have understood that vulnerability before. And that vulnerability, of course, is at its most extreme in nuclear weapons, when whole sections of humanity are in danger of continuation of life. So in my book, I describe it the triple emergency. And of course, we hear a lot about the COVID. Of course, we're living the COVID every day in every aspect of it. And we're very conscious of the climate because of everything that's going on in the global warming. The public is less conscious of nuclear weapons. It's as if that problem is sort of receded. I mean, I began by saying, well, 80% of Canadians will want something done, so they know something about it, but it's not activated. It's not top of the list of priorities for Canadians. And there are a number of organizations, probably we'll talk about them in this discussion we're having, that are concerned about how governments must take a stronger approach to recognizing the dangers that all of humanity is experiencing now by the continued existence and modernization of nuclear weapons, which is directly against the Non-Proliferation Treaty. Thus, in 2017, a humanitarian movement that had been building up for a number of years, composed of governments, a number of governments that are very socially conscious, and an active advanced wing, so to speak, of civil society, particularly the International Campaign to Abolish Nuclear Weapons, which went on to win the Nobel Peace Prize for its work, combined to create through negotiations at the United Nations, which was all properly done under UN mandate, a treaty called the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons. And this is the first time that a treaty has been developed that outlaws, delegitimizes, stigmatizes the possession of nuclear weapons. The Non-Proliferation Treaty accepts that certain states have nuclear weapons and says we should get rid of them all. That's fine. But the Prohibition Treaty goes right at the root of the problem and says the very possession of nuclear weapons is contrary to law and every aspect of morality. And thus, the states, the requirements of the treaty were that the treaty would come into effect when 50 states have ratified it, and that occurred in January of this year. And thus, this is a new treaty that has entered into force and has a legal bearing in the world. There are some shades of legal opinion as to how effective the treaty is. Obviously, one has to sign on to the treaty in order to be bound by it. But the nuclear weapon states have fought against the very existence of the treaty and the possession of nuclear weapons. Why are they doing this? Because they want to retain nuclear weapons. Why do they want to retain them? Because nuclear weapons have become the instruments of power and in the political exchanges in the world. So I say this with great regret that our friends and neighbors, the United States, have been leading the campaign, particularly in the Trump years, leading the campaign against the treaty and intimidating its partners and allies, and particularly the NATO states, from signing the treaty, which brings us to Canada. So Canada has not joined the Treaty on the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons. At first, it tried to dismiss it, and then it said, well, it's premature. And now they're saying, well, it's not compatible with NATO or our NATO obligations. What are our obligations to NATO? Well, NATO takes a position and says in a strategic concept that nuclear weapons are the supreme guarantee, those are the words, supreme guarantee of security. And this is directly opposed to what the Non-Proliferation Treaty says, and which in the year 2000, all states parties to the Non-Proliferation Treaty, which is virtually most of the world, agreed to an undertaking to totally eliminate nuclear weapons. So we are at cross purposes in our professed allegiance to the Non-Proliferation Treaty on the one hand, and our obedience to the strictures of NATO, which says that nuclear weapons are necessary. How do you square these? How do you put this together? The answer is you cannot. And so Canada is caught in a bind with its other NATO states. And all the NATO states are going through various stages of reassessment of this dilemma. And we feel that those who are leading the nuclear disarmament movement in Canada feel that we must increase the pressure on our own government to recognize that it has significant responsibilities. And thus on Monday of 2 days from now, the Hill Times, which is a very important publication reaching the decision makers in Ottawa, is going to have a full page ad. I'll just show it here. I know it's too difficult to read it, but it's a full page ad in the Hill Times that says Canadians back nuclear weapons ban. And this ad takes the form of an open letter to Prime Minister Trudeau, in which we recount this NANO's poll that states should join the Prohibition Treaty and work with it, and then additional actions to be taken. So this open letter is it's a very truncated version of a much longer letter that was sent to the Prime Minister that resulted from 4 webinars over the winter and spring months held by Canadians for a Nuclear Weapons Convention. That's the organization that is built on members of the Order of Canada who have spoken out, and there's more than 1,000 members of the Order of Canada who've signed statements calling on the Government of Canada to accept and implement its responsibilities to participate in the process of elimination of nuclear weapons. So we have in this organization is much it works along the same lines as the Canadian Network to abolish nuclear weapons, which has 16 organizations across Canada. So we should not think that nothing's being done about this terrible situation. There's a lot being done, but we have yet to get the government of Canada seized of the crucial nature of the nuclear weapons problem now that it is undergoing modernization, and we are seeing nuclear weapons being built to go into the years throughout the present century. That is to say, 3/4 of the century still to come. So it is a very difficult situation to contemplate, and that's why a lot of people shy away from it. But
Doug, just as you wrap up, because you've laid just a wonderful background and showing the responsibility to Canada. So you're going to have another opportunity. So if just wrap up your presentation, then we'll go to Richard and Anne, because what they will do, they're going to build on what you have said, and you've talked about the complexity. They are the grassroots people working within a movement that is local to global, and they'll be able to address the kinds of things that they see civil society doing. So if you just wrap up your initial presentation, that'd be great. Thanks.
Thank you. That's exactly where we need to go, is where civil society can do in expressing itself in letters and so on, raising the voice, the conscience of civil society, that we in Canada do not want to live in a world that is in which the dangers to civilization are so high. It's true that we do not want to have the planet burn up, and thus we're engaged in climate actions. But we do not want the world to blow up, which would be the result of a nuclear exchange, a nuclear exchange. So these are big problems that we're facing, and we have to be up to the challenge.
And just to build on the NANIS poll, to show that anecdotally it is very accurate, maybe an underestimate. This morning at 9 a.m., the Rotary District 5550, consisting of Manitoba, Saskatchewan, Northwestern Ontario, and 48 Rotary clubs, had its annual general meeting and passed 4 resolutions, which included the resolutions that come from Richard Denton's district, within a range of 83% to 98% support, all for nuclear weapon abolition, taking politics out of Rotary in terms of sort of creating an obstacle to this kind of discussion. So this is actually beginning to work within the democracy, the international democracy of Rotary. So what a day for this to happen. And Douglas, thanks for providing so much inspiration and hope with your book and your words. So we'll come back to you, but Richard, I'd love to hear the voice from Sudbury of someone that is an emerging Rotary international leader. Thank you.
Well, thank you, David, and thank you, Kaswar, and this organization for having me here today. And it's certainly been a delight to have the Honorable Douglas Roche, who is my mentor, speak today. If we could just go to the next slide. And I think what today we're talking about is the whole rebuilding of the anti-nuclear war movement. The release of the atomic power has changed everything except our way of thinking. The solution to this problem lies in the heart of mankind, said Albert Einstein. Next slide. So we need to look at the past. And I think often people say that we are dreamers, that we are idealists about getting rid of nuclear weapons, but who would have thought that there was the fall of the Berlin Wall? Who would have thought that there was the fall of the Soviet Union? we have decreased from 70,000 nuclear weapons to about 13,500 currently. And that was back during the Cold War. Next slide. The present, we've had, as mentioned, the pandemics, we've had the climate crisis, we've had cyber terrorism. What's also new is social media, the use of the computer, the iPhone, the smartphone, Twitter, Facebook, Google. All of these are new medias that have just developed in the last few years. We certainly know about rapid transportation of not only food, and so we can talk about food insecurity if that is cut off. We know how people travel and spread pandemics, and then again with goods. And finally, what is also new is nuclear weapons. During the Cold War, it was strategic, large nuclear weapons, but what is now being developed are very small 5-kiloton nuclear weapons, and people are now talking about using them. And so if you use a small nuclear weapon, then that's going to escalate back to the strategic large nuclear weapons that are aimed at cities. Next slide. What is also new from the past is our knowledge about nuclear winter. A lot of people, including the military, think that nuclear weapons are simply bigger, better bombs. But they don't realize that they will put soot and dirt into the stratosphere, high up into our atmosphere, which will then partially block out the sun. It will lower the world's temperatures up to possibly 4 degrees. We're talking about trying to limit it to a rise of 1.5 degrees, but they would lower the temperature 4 degrees. That will cause catastrophic effects in terms of our crops, resulting in failure. And as a result, people will die of starvation. Even a small limited war, nuclear war between India and Pakistan, with using just half of their arsenal, and they have about 150 nuclear weapons each. And if they use just half of that, that would kill probably over 4 billion people over the next 10 years. Nuclear weapons also give off radiation, which again travels around the world. And if a nuclear weapon is detonated high in the atmosphere, it would give off an electromagnetic pulse, which would knock out all of electricity. So this is mutually assured destruction. It's mad. And as Senator Roche has mentioned, it's illogical. It's insane. And as he also mentioned, is the insane cost that we are now spending to modernize it. And I will talk more about the humanitarian aspects. And these are the new concepts that are helping to rebuild our anti-nuclear program. Next slide. So I just want to talk about how things are now. We're going from fear with the military to justice through dialogue and mediation. I think when we look at nuclear weapons, they're immoral. And what we need to look at is how decisions are made. First, in the past, we've had decisions made from the top down, authoritarian, which was a rights-based authority. So it's the authority of the king. It's the authority of the emperor, the dictator. Then we came up with the rule of law. And as it applies to nuclear weapons, it was a stepwise approach. You've had various treaties that have been passed. The Intermediate Forces, IMF Treaty, the Comprehensive Test Ban Treaty, the NonProliferation Treaty, all aimed at different aspects of nuclear weapons. Here in Canada, we've been pushing the Fissile Material Cutoff Treaty. And again, unfortunately, it hasn't really gone anywhere. It's still in discussion, but Canada is pushing it. And it's interesting that Canada is actually defying this very treaty by wanting to separate out plutonium in New Brunswick, and is giving billions of dollars to do that, which will therefore increase the risk of terrorism by creating more plutonium. Finally, we need to go from a rights-based to a rule of law to interest-based. And as Doug says, this is where I think the rebuilding is occurring, is at the grassroots. And as mentioned by Senator Roche, the Treaty on the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons, the TPNW, is not looking at an aspect of nuclear weapons. It's saying, let's get rid of it completely. And as the Honorable Doug Roche has mentioned, we've talked about civil society and non-government organizations. And they all realize that everything is connected. It is an interdependent web. I think we also need to go from, again, the old thinking of national security, of the military, to looking at personal security. And this is the things that are affecting us globally. So the climate crisis, the pandemics, the cyber terrorism, it is issues like racism, poverty, the inequity between genders. What the pandemic has showed is how the wealthy have become more wealthy, the poor have become poorer. And while the pandemic can affect us all, certainly it is killing off the poor people who are lacking adequate health care. So I think what is new now is looking at personal security. We're not at risk of having Russia or China attack us. What is happening is that these countries are fighting proxy wars in third world countries. So whether it's in Afghanistan, in the Middle East, Venezuela, wherever, that's where these countries are fighting. I think it's also interesting that where the real war will be is one of economics. And China certainly realizes this with its 5G technology. And it is certainly expanding its empire around the world into Africa, into Southeast Asia. And this is where I see the real war happening is one of economics and not military. And as mentioned by Senator Roche, is the partnering with the NGOs, civil society. And so, as he has mentioned, the International Campaign Against Nuclear Weapons. And here in Canada, we have the Canadian Network Against Nuclear Weapons that the Honorable Doug was a founder of. And again, also the environment. So we have seen the connections between these. And as mentioned, I think we have looked at nuclear weapons as being immoral. My organization, International Physicians for the Prevention of Nuclear War, has stressed this importance that nuclear weapons are aimed at cities where indiscriminately they will kill innocent civilians, as well as destroying the environment. And because they are so powerful, their effects go around the world and affect everybody. And so we can look at nuclear weapons as a wildfire, as with the fires and heat. We can look at it as a tornado with extremely strong winds. We can look at it as a hurricane covering a large area with lots of wind and destroying that way. But it also has the problem of radiation, which people often fail to realize. And so nuclear weapons are the most destructive weapon of mass destruction. And as a result, they're illogical, they're insane. Again, the MAD, and thanks to the Treaty on the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons, they're now illegal. And so I think this is the new thing, is that we're making nuclear weapons to be banned completely. And as mentioned, also what is new is the use of social media, which our youth are much more akin to using. And so that is going to rebuild the anti-nuclear movement. What the other thing is divestment. In the past, we haven't really pushed that, but that is what is having an effect now. The old adage is of follow the money. And so we're now looking at not investing in 27 companies around the world that make nuclear weapons and their delivery system. And this is having an effect because you're having very large pension funds, the Norwegian one, which is in billions of dollars, not investing in nuclear weapons. And we're doing the same with fossil fuels. And we're now looking at a fossil fuel treaty that is being based upon the TPNW. So divestment is going to have a big effect. It's having a big effect in terms of the petroleum-based companies, and it's also going to have an effect on the nuclear companies. And just this past week, as we have heard, the Dutch government has come out again, or has instructed Dutch Shell to green its operations and to decrease its carbon footprint. So you're now having the courts, like they did with the tobacco industry, point out the harm that they have done and are now being instituted to pay in big money. The other thing is to move the money from the $1.3 trillion that has been mentioned over the next 30 years to addressing personal security, to addressing the climate change, to addressing our health, to addressing poverty, to giving women equal pay for equal work. So
Doug,
what we have
if you just wrap and
Yes.
we'll move to, thank you.
I'm just
Carry
finished.
on. Yeah.
I'm just finishing.
Good.
So these are negative and positive peace. And that is, I think, where the big difference is between the past and the present. And these are the changes that are now going to help to rebuild. And my colleague, Dr. Anne Frisch, will now give an example of what's happening in Rotary. Thank you.
Richard, wonderful. And the transition, your segue from national security to personal security is something that, when you think about it, is so huge, because Treaty of Westphalia and national state concepts certainly aren't in line with the cross-border issues of pandemics and existential threats to global humanity. And we haven't yet come to a situation globally where we have figured out that this concept of personal security, meaning capacity to stay alive, support from the global community of decision makers, that our job as human beings should be to nurture the potential of human beings, keep them safe, and have them flourish. We haven't escaped. The nation states have become the modern day tribes. So let's move to Anne and hear a voice of hope, an educator of Rotarians, and look forward, Anne, to your comments.
You're muted, Anne.
And if you unmute, kind.
All right, thank you very much. It's really fun to be here and to see different perspectives. I am going to start with a question. We are rebuilding the anti-nuclear movement, windows of opportunity. So I'm in Rotary, and so I work with a business and professional audience. And we focus on the humanitarian perspective of mutually assured destruction and try to reframe it in terms of mutually assured survival, with a note of optimism there that we can do that. So I'd like to say that we have a captive audience in Rotary. We can reach them. We have district and international meetings, local meetings, community meetings. It's every activist dream to be able to walk into a room and have 30 to 100 people listening attentively for a half an hour to 45 minutes. We have their bodies. Can we get their minds and their thinking? And that is the question that has been framed by Albert Einstein in the slide that you saw from Richard. So there are windows of opportunity, but getting through windows can be a challenge. So how to approach this issue in a way that it has the same currency as other movements? So we have the issue of guns, schoolyard, counterpart, bullying. And I tell you that there are people who spend their whole lives trying to eradicate bullying in schools. Then we have racism, and we have police practices, efforts to defund the police, use social services to address mental illness, living room conversations, etc., to deal with white supremacy. We have sexism and efforts to be inclusive beyond race, include the inclusion of trans people. And we have climate instability and social movements focusing on oil and gas and greenhouse gases, loss of bees and butterflies, all of course, which would be obliterated in a nuclear conflagration. So all raise questions about nuclear weapons, even if they're never used. So while these are windows, they are just a start. We have to persuade the anti-racism people that the biggest racism of all is nuclear weapons. We have to persuade the gun people that there are bigger guns that will obliterate and be more than a mass murder in the post office. We have to persuade the climate solution activists that nuclear weapons are the #1 threat to the planet, continue to use greenhouse gases, and are expensive and dangerous, even if they're never used. So and we have also tried to play the pandemic card also, I think with some success. But even while we can now imagine a pandemic, it's still, we are eager to get it off the table. So is there a way of going forward without extrapolating from certain social currents? One example would be we have our own endless wars. So that's maybe pretty much focused in the United States, but I guess could be applied to other countries as well. But to focus in on what is not being used, nuclear weapons, or we hope it's not going to be used, is a question. Will some of these endless wars, or ending one just to jump on another, will that move us to end the last war preemptively? Will the revelation that nuclear war on China was being considered in 1958 worries us that yes, rational leaders may still today use nuclear weapons as the easy way of keeping China in its place, even though we believe in competition and may the best one win. But we don't mind, the US and other countries, in fact, don't mind using weapons to obliterate their commercial opponents. So I want to say that jumping on the bandwagon of all these social movements is hard in itself. It is not easy access because we have to then win over the guardians of those movements to say, excuse me, I'm coming through the window here. Then we have to undertake with not only our own opponents, but their opponents too. So it is, in fact, a risky business. So the threat of all this is we have to get this on the human agenda. Nuclear weapons seem to be the most problematic in part because we have visceral experiences of mass shootings and white police officers killing Black men and women and men pretty much get sexism. We don't have a visceral experience of human nuclear weapons, no matter how we tried to bring in the old photographs and movie of Hiroshima and the Habak show. Ray Matsumiya has tried to get in the door with the concept of resilience and showing how resilient and how quick to respond were the victims of Hiroshima. But unfortunately, that's not our message. Our message is we have no resilience capacity here. 100 nuclear weapons, it's going to be bad. And it's not like dropping one bomb on Hiroshima, kind of a limited area. Not really, but it could be seen that way. So the message of the International Committee for the Red Cross and Red Crescent is there is no emergency response to nuclear war. Only solution is prevention, abolition, a very different message from resilience. So the military, unfortunately, is also using this strategy. In their report, NATO 2030, United for a New Era, they bring in climate change, they bring in women and security, they bring in all the same things that we've talked about here as their hegemony. They are claiming to have responsibility for climate change, although they really don't have a plan to do it themselves. And they want to protect women and have peace and security and actually are using the term human security as if they dared to take over some of our civilian claim legitimacy. So will the anti-nuclear movement, whether in Rotary or elsewhere, be successful in melding its campaign with climate change, gun control, racism, demilitarizing the police, putting women out in front of the moment? I'm not sure. So Richard and I and some other people, Dr. Ira Helfand, all Rotarians, and we've been working inside Rotary, perhaps the ideal place to work. In spite of their early adherence and helping to create the United Nations and Universal Declaration of Human Rights, got scotched in the 60s because of the anti-communist threat. So there are still formidable opponents in Rotary that do not want this discussion. However, the recent wave of advocacy toward resolving racism and Rotary climate change has finally gotten some good currency. My club in fact, brought in a Russian, a Nigerian, and a Hmong in the last few months. So all of these things are coming together to give us a place in this seismic change that's going on. And we've seen this wave go through accepting climate solutions, funding climate solution, racism efforts. And so we're trying to find our place in all of these things. And so we have to decide if we're willing to fight the battle of look like climate change, fight the battle of looking like racism, and then having to face their opponents. So this is really a very tricky thing. But I think there's some cause for optimism. I was speaking with someone in the environmental sustainability reg and trying to make the claim, we need to be in this movement. We have legitimate place in this movement. And she really reveals that she really doesn't have the basic understanding. However, what she said was, I think you should do an environmental impact statement of nuclear weapons and show how it impacts the climate. So I think that was a wonderful gift, and I think we need to respond with some urgency to do that. So I'm going to close here, and in a sense of urgency of getting on with the conversation. But I just to close here to say, I think we can provide information and education, and we understand that not everybody acts just because somebody says something. So we understand it takes hearing something once, twice, 3 times, 5 times in order to act. But more important, we need to lay out a path of action for people. And this is not just in Rotary, this is everywhere. You have to give people a path. Other organizations have easier pathways for activism. So we have to find out what that is, apart from contacting your legislature to do for us what we can't do ourselves. So let me return this to you. Much pleasure in being with you all today.
Thanks so much, Anne, for your contribution. And it's the beginning, not the end of even today's session for you to speak. But I really welcome now Doug and Richard and then Anne to pose a question if you want, or make observations on what you've heard from each other. This was not co-produced. These were each making their own individual presentations, no one knowing exactly what they would be. So I would welcome some questions between you. And Kauser, are there any questions in chat or anything?
So I'm streaming live here. So no, so far, no question from the audience.
Okay. So the Honorable Doug Roche, why don't you respond to and comment and ask questions?
Sir, can you unmute, sir?
Congratulations to all my fellow panelists. I think we've covered some very important terrain in this discussion. I've spent many years, more than I like to count, on dealing with why do governments still hold nuclear weapons policies, despite everything that's been said and the logic and now the law and recognition that they have no military value. Why are they still going on? Why? What's the answer to that question? And I've come back repeatedly, and in this most recent round of my thinking now, I've come back to the moral question that unless we recognize the complete immorality, we need an ethical basis for how we're going to live in the world. Now, the theologians and spiritual leaders have been telling us this. You might say it's a vertical descent through history to learn to love one another, and it's not a bad way to live if you can master that. But that admonition, is what you might call a spiritual admonition, has now come flat against a horizontal recognition in the modern world of the vulnerability of weapons of mass destruction. And so for our very survival depends on it. And as Richard said, it's our personal security, not the national security, which is uppermost now in many people's minds. And the coronavirus has brought that home to us in a devastating fashion. So I conclude this comment in response to your point that we have to recover an ethical, global ethic, an ethic of concern, of recognition that we need to treat one another as we wish to be treated ourselves. That's a fundamental value that's found in all religions, and it goes far beyond religion because it's now in a practical arena. We cannot constantly threaten other states with annihilation and expect not to have that done to ourselves. And so we need a common security agenda that is based on a global ethic, social justice aspirations translated into political action. The United Nations is the vehicle for doing this. We've had the United Nations for 75 years. And many, many wonderful things have come from the United Nations. Not enough, to be sure. It doesn't have enough strength. But the Sustainable Development Goals, the 17 points to raise the level of human activity and development and the erosion of poverty, that is a moral agenda. It needs to be recognized that we have a basis already in life for advancing a global ethic. Let us use that as a basis for further action.
Well, that is
what I keep
just a
coming back
marvelous
to-
contribution. Go ahead, Anne. You can please comment, Anne.
And what I finally come to is, this is a corporate racket, and when are we going to just get really pissed off?
I think you are. And I think you're causing other people to be using whatever pejorative term you want, engaged in ways that go beyond the mind. And thanks for bringing some emotion like that into this, because this is really a heart and a spirit issue, as Doug has pointed out. And what Doug has done in his book, for those of you who haven't read it, from my vantage point, is showing that there is heart and spirit in some of the global institutions that we have, which of course consist of people. And there's statements that have been made throughout recent history since the formation of the United Nations. And Doug points out, starting with its origin, going back to 1946, that relate to nuclear weapons and the humanitarian and moral, ethical, value-driven responsibility of our global institutions. The problem we all know is that we have the veto power of 5 countries that are the modern day colonizers and dominators. And then we have them, of course, being concurrently the ones that hold the nuclear weapons. So that is an impediment, obviously, until their humanitarian and moral, ethical value instincts motivated, certainly in democracies at least, to come to the fore. I mean, why isn't this happening in the United States? Why isn't it happening in France and the UK, that are those modern day international law impediments to those things coming to the fore. I would venture to guess that China and Russia, if they saw an example of that kind of humanitarian, moral, value-driven leadership, the hearts and minds and spirits of their peoples would cause them to become dominant, authoritarian, or collective communist oligarchies controlling their people, because every human being wants their potential to be nurtured and the ability to flourish. So I think this conversation is moving very much in a very good direction back to the heart and spirit and universal common humanity need for protection, for safety, for a voice. And I see Kauser shaking his head because he's thinking of the stateless people that have not even a country to defend and represent them. Richard, I'd really much appreciate your comment as a emerging Rotary leader, but as an amazing human being who has worked in grassroots democracy as a mayor of a northern community in Ontario. And you understand people, you understand realities. So how do we deal with this need for personal security?
Well, I think it comes down to building relationships. In Rotary, we have what's called the Inter-Country Committees, which has Rotary clubs from one country and our district partnering with another country. And so we have Americans and Canadians going over to Russia and vice versa, having them come over here and seeing that we are not evil and they are not evil, and that we are all human. And this does break down the borders and comes back to talking about personal security as opposed to national. And I think certainly, as Doug has pointed out, the importance of faith-based groups, the Dalai Lama, the Pope, have come out with excellent statements against nuclear weapons. And certainly, I think by partnering with a number of organizations, we are partnering with the International Committee of the Red Cross and Red Crescent, with the United Nations. Rotary has their Rotary representative network at the UN, and I think we can build on that. I'm actually very optimistic. Again, several years ago, it was the climate crisis was thought to be, quote, political, and Rotarians did not want to talk about it. And it has now become our 7th area of focus. And so we, like the 17 Sustainable Development Goals of the UN, Rotary now has 7 goals or areas of focus, and climate is one of them. And we have talked about peace. Peace was actually one of our first areas of focus, but people have felt that nuclear weapons were controversial, but as opposed to being a humanitarian issue. But I think they are a humanitarian issue, and it is hoped that Rotarians and the world will see it as such, that they are our threat to our personal security through accidents, miscalculations, or terrorism. But there is hope because of moving the money away from spending on these, what I would say are useless, wasteful weapons, to the issues that really concern us: the pandemics, providing healthcare, providing, working on the climate. These are the issues that we need to be working on. Thank you.
Thanks, Richard. I'd like now, Kauser, with your permission and Halal's, to turn this over to you, because you and Halal will have questions, and you've sat here and listened So chance to pose your questions, make your observations. And Kauser, you're now in charge. You take it to the end and express thanks at the end. It's been my privilege to be part of this. And I'm so delighted this discussion is recorded, because I think there's lots that is deserving of being heard by a far wider audience than here today. So Kauser, you take it over from here. And once again, my thanks for being part of this.
Thank you so much, David, for such a brilliant discussion. I would like to invite Dr. Hilal if you have any observations, comments, and then I would like to sum up and thank the distinguished panelists. Dr. Hilal, please come in. Thank you.
Thank you, Honorable Senator Douglas Roche, Dr. Anne Frisch, and Dr. Richard. I am talking from the grassroots, and I have some observations as well, and I will be trying to be as brief as possible. So I'm teaching in a Bangladesh university at this moment, and it is my understanding, my observation, that at the grassroots level, civil society engagements and NGO engagements are much less on this agenda. It's really the over-neglected issue, I would say, here, especially among the students too. So when we were talking about this non-proliferation issue, I can share with you some of my examples that I had with my students here in different debates and discussions about this issue. They were also raising the point that most of the time, third world countries, especially the grassroots people that can make a special voice and that can gather voice of other people too, they are reluctant to talk about this issue, that it's like a big issue that can only be discussed in the United Nations and not for the common people's cup of tea. So there is a big gap. And probably as Rotarians, from your discussions and understanding, as I was listening to very carefully, it was very enlightening. At the same time, I think there needs to be a very concerted effort from the international communities, especially from the activists like you, who could make a real difference at the grassroots level in the third world countries, just to make people aware and conscious that global warming and the sustainability issues, SDGs that we are talking about these days too much, like global warming and the securing a sustainable future for our next generations, everything is really depending on their human security. If we can't focus on that, then all other efforts, the big efforts and all other things would be whatever, just really disjointed and meaningless, and without any effect in the long run. So the message needs to be shared among the grassroots, I believe, in the third world countries in a very bolder voice. It's my understanding at this moment. Thank you very much for this enlightening discussion.
Any comments? I mean, what I understood from Dr. Hilal's observation that in the third world countries, which do not possess nuclear weapons, but they are kind of lie in the periphery of the maximum damage. For example, if you think about Bangladesh, just beside India and Pakistan, and both are nuclear armed countries, can we imagine how disastrous it would be if the event of even limited nuclear weapon, what we call tactical nuclear weapons use? So any comments, distinguished panelist? Sir.
Yeah. Yes, I congratulate Halal for his comment, and also representation of the best of Bangladesh. Bangladesh is a country that's very close to my heart, and as you pointed out a minute ago, it's caught between India and Pakistan. But Bangladesh has been a leader in the quest for peace in the world, despite the enormity of the problems and the the surging populations and how it has taken in refugees and the Myanmar, and it's an example to the world of how to overcome adversity. And Bangladesh did this by the education of women and girls in school. They put a strong focus and resources into the education of people, and particularly, as I say, women and girls, so that Bangladesh has become a real leader in the world. And one of its distinguished sons, Anwar Chaudhary, as a virtual father at the United Nations of the culture of peace. And many other points could be raised concerning the contribution of Bangladesh to the United Nations agenda, and not least in the area of disarmament in all its aspects, and the leadership that Bangladesh continues to give today is an inspiration to many other countries.
Thank you, sir. Thank you so much. But Dr. Richard, please come in. Thank you.
I would just echo what Doug has said, and also point out that the nuclear weapon-free zones are territories that have banned nuclear weapons completely, encompass the whole southern hemisphere, except for maybe Australia. But it is these countries that have also pushed the Treaty on the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons through, and have been the 122 countries that were signatories to it back in 2017 and during its creation. And I think one of the problems that with treaties in the past, like the NPT, is that they haven't put in a timeline. So Article 6 is, it'll be done in good faith. And also the way that decisions are made, consensus to me means understanding, whereas to these, to the P5, it means having a veto. And unfortunately, first world countries lord this over third world countries and have that veto. So I think that is also a thing that needs to change, and certainly welcome the participation of all these countries in the Southern Hemisphere and making tremendous efforts for peace.
Thank you, sir. Dr. N, if you have any comments.
Yes, I just want to say that I think we need to get this into the discussion in our everyday lives. In my Unitarian church, when we were faced with a constitutional amendment in Minnesota to ban same-sex marriage, the first thing we did was to have conversations. It was officially expected that we were all to go out and have 5-10 conversations. When we came back, we made a chain that went around the room that showed all the conversations that ensued. And we won that. We defeated that amendment with that kind of thinking. So how do we get this into our everyday conversations? So I have just one single example. So we now have official in the United States, we have official policies, you can't hate Asian Americans. And my response is, so let's get rid of our official enemies, Russia and China, because that's why we hate them, is because they're our official enemies. Let's embrace them. Let's make love with them. Let's change the whole global context of official hate toward Asian Americans. And if people go like, you know, whoa, wait a minute, that can't have anything to do with it. Yes, it does. It is everything about hate toward American and Asian Americans. It's because they're our official enemies. That's it.
Thank you so much, Dr. N. Ladies and gentlemen, we are at the fag end of this event, and I would like to add a couple of things with the statements and deliberation of our distinguished panelists. For example, I would like to share with the audience the International Youth Nuclear Peace Treaty that took place between October 9 and 11 in Winnipeg, Manitoba. And they actually came up with brilliant suggestions, and in number of articles, out of which I would only mention first two, in the pursuit of global opportunities and overcoming barriers to global peace, states and parties. And they have identified number of clauses there which can be easily implementable. And in the Article 2, human costs, they also, the summit and the participants, all the young people, they have written down so many interesting aspects that we can do. Ladies and gentlemen, we have heard the insights of very much experienced persons in this field, those who have excelled in their careers. You have heard Honorable Senator Douglas Roche, physician Dr. Richard Denton, and educator Dr. Anne Frisch. All of them have excelled in their careers, but they have spent enormous time in understanding the human cost of these nuclear weapons and related matters. One thing I take from the speech from Honorable Senator Douglas Roche, he says that cross opportunities, cross purposes, and this is so important for us, those who work in the field of peace and conflict studies, to understand this magnitude of cross purposes of various stakeholders. Ladies and gentlemen, Dr. Richard very eloquently showed in his slide the moving towards positive peace from negative peace. And in this occasion, let me remind you, the audience, that our distinguished panelists have seen enough in their lives. They have seen Cold War, they have seen the transition from Cold War to a new world, again subverted back due to terrorism in 2001, and then the dawn of Trump era, and so on and so forth. So it is wonderful to listen to them and their particular contribution towards this anti-nuclear movement. So finally, I would like to end with the optimistic note that we are very much optimistic, and Conflict and Resilience Research Institute today hosted this first dialogue, as Dr. Anne Frisch a number of times highlighted, that we need dialogue, we need continuous dialogue so that our relationship builds towards anti-nuclear weapon movement. So Conflict and Resilience Research Institute, with the help of Rotary Club of Winnipeg Peacebuilder Committee, where Mr. David G. Newman is a co-founder, organized this first effort, and we look forward to bring more experts and continue our dialogue. Ladies and gentlemen, just as I would say a coincidence maybe, when we started our discussion, it was raining in Winnipeg. But look outside now, those who are in Winnipeg, it's bright sunny sky. So I would like to end this session by saying that we have hopes. We have to have hopes. We cannot be hopeless. Ladies and gentlemen, look at these as distinguished panelists. They have elaborated what they have seen. They want the change in towards positivity so that we all live as a single human race. And Dr. Anne Frisch, my last word, if you would like to help us, we would like to endorse in understanding the catastrophe of environment due to nuclear war, nuclear weapons. So we'll be in touch with you, hopefully, and see if we can collaboratively undertake a study on that, because it is so important in today's context. So I leave all of you with this happy note and optimistic tone that, and be happy and be safe wherever you are. And once again, my deep, deep gratitude to Honorable Senator Douglas Roche, Dr. Richard, and Dr. Anne Frisch, and above all, Mr. David G. Newman, to give us this opportunity to host this brilliant session. Goodbye.